Hello,
Hello.
my name is Megan,
And I'm Evelyn.
and we read books, and we're going to talk about them.
Yes, we did.
In a professional manner, and their connections to diversity.
And each other.
And each other.
And their differences.
And what we learned.
So, would you like to
I would.
talk about your book?
My book is by Russell Jung, and it is called At Home in Exile, Finding Jesus Among My Ancestors and Refugee Neighbors. And it is exactly as the subheading sounds. That is what he did. He's American born, but he's Chinese. And well, I guess I should start. This is a nonfiction book.
Mm-hmm.
He's Chinese, and his Chinese ethnicity is actually the Hakka, and because like in China, like you're not just Chinese, like there's all these different ethnic groups.
Mm-hmm.
Like the biggest one is the Han, but the Hakka were actually like kind of oppressed within China as a group. They were seen as like kind of like Hicks, or like they were like looked down upon, like just seen as, I guess Hicks, like rednecks, like kind of how we view the South, but like we exaggerate it a lot, you know?
We have a lot of stereotypes about that.
But like these ones were like way more hateful than like,
It was more personal?
yeah, it was like, I don't know, like we can make fun of like the South and be like, oh, like they're all hillbillies and they marry their cousins or whatever, you know, like, but even if that's offensive, it is in a playful way. It's like they actually just straight up hated Hakka people, considered them uneducated because they were mostly like farmers, and they had in the area that they're at, they speak Cantonese, but the dialect, the Hakka dialect, they said was like incomprehensible to people who spoke Cantonese, even though it was a dialect of Cantonese. It was just like, like picture like someone with like a really, really, really heavy Southern accent just being like, I have no idea what you're saying.
Like a Cajun accent?
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah. Kind
of like that. It's just hard to compare because we don't have dialects the way that, well, we do, but we only have like a handful, whereas they have like
really
1,000.
I feel like our dialects are more like colloquialisms, if I'm saying that right. It's more like different areas will have different slang terms.
Yeah, like the, it's not so much anymore, but like California, like the dude, you know, like
rad. Oh, yeah. Now it's like skate culture now. Yeah, it's expanded.
But I guess with the internet, it's like, our slang kind of got put into one pool.
East Coast. Before Vine and Twitter and Instagram, I've never heard anyone not from the East Coast say dead ass anything.
Oh, that's funny because I say it all the time now.
Yeah,
I didn't even know
that one.
Of that.
And Wicked or Hella.
Hella. I've been saying hella since I was out of the womb.
Yeah?
Yeah, that's a good one. Anyway, back to the
back
to the topic at hand.
Hakka.
So he kind of goes in between like each chapter talking about like his ancestral stuff, like his family's background. And a lot of it's just obviously stories that he's heard from like his mom and his dad because he wasn't there, obviously. But one thing I thought was cool is that he figured out that I think the current leader of China, Xi Jinping, is Hakka as well. Like he found out there's like 3 people that descended from Hakkas, and one of them is like the creator of modern China.
Wow.
So like the reason it is what it is today, and then one of them is like the actual president right now. So he's just kind of like, we're Hicks, huh? Look at us. So that was really cool. But he's very religious, and that was kind of, I was really worried at first.
Yeah.
It was like, I was born and raised Catholic, I still believe in God, but I was like, oh God, am I gonna have to read like about how everything I do in my life is wrong and how I should, you know, I thought it was gonna be way more preachy, and like by the name, I don't know, Russell just sounded like kind of a older man's name, so I was like, is this gonna be like some like elderly man talking to me about Jesus? Like that sounds terrible. He's not. He's older because he's got a PhD and everything. He's got kids and a family, but like I put him at like in like his 40s, like you know.
Yep.
And it's actually really funny. And so aside from like the family part, he talks about his time living in a place called Oak Park, not to be confused with Oaks Park, which is a theme park. This is not that. And the particular neighborhood, or the Oak Park neighborhood, it's full of mostly Cambodian refugees.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like pretty much everyone he lives with is like a refugee of some sort, or just part of like some sort of marginalized group, and they're all like really poor. And like there's a lot of violence. I think he called it like the murder dub. Oakland's Murder Dubs neighborhood. Yeah. Okay. So it's like we're talking Oakland, California.
Yes.
You know, violence.
Yep. I know that.
So and he chose to live here. Okay. So this guy's he's from like a wealthy family. Like his dad made bank.
Yeah.
He had money. He went to Stanford. So it's like, but he chose to live with these people.
Was it like one of those, like when people move into the Bronx or Brooklyn, before Brooklyn was like gentrified, kind of people that wanted to go for the experience, or was he trying to learn?
That's what I
in
thought.
The community?
That's what I thought at first. But that's where the Jesus part comes in.
Oh, okay.
So, my problem with a lot of, like, just as someone who is Catholic, my problem with a lot of, like, religious people is that it's pretty much everything they stand for is so against, like, what Jesus would have actually stood for, you know? Like, he was friends with all the people that you look down upon.
Yes.
And you say they're ungodly.
Yeah.
It's hilarious. So I was, like, kind of expecting it from this guy, too.
Yeah.
But he mentions that a lot, about the hypocrisy of, like, so-called Christians. And he kind of, like, used that as, like, he had the privilege of being born into a wealthy family and getting the education that he had, and he considers like his faith to be a privilege too.
Mm-hmm.
And so he recognizes this privilege and says like pretty much WWJD, what would Jesus do?
Yeah.
Except this guy's actually doing what Jesus would do. So I thought he was gonna move in and be like, oh, I know what it's like to be poor, you know, like how
trying to empathize when
yeah,
you can't really relate.
But like he actually lived like and I'm talking like dirt poor. Like he didn't have a bed. He lived in like a studio apartment with another person, and like that guy didn't have it. Like they slept on the ground, and like they just kind of did whatever they had to do to get by every day.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't like a romanticizing. Like he was really adamant about the fact that he didn't want to romanticize being poor, because he knew like obviously it's not great,
not
or else everybody
thing.
would want to be poor.
Yeah.
But he kind of tied into like, well, Jesus empathized with pretty much all the misfits of the world. And he thought, I can't sympathize with poor people unless I know exactly what they're going through.
Mm-hmm.
So he kind of put himself in that situation, but also used things, like used his privilege to help the people around him. Like he taught English as a second language classes in his apartment, like after school for the kids. Like he used things that he knew based on his privilege as like a wealthy person, and like brought it to these people, but wasn't like expecting anything in return, like
just completely selfless.
Yeah.
Giving.
And like he talks a lot about how he didn't want to, like a lot of problem with when people do that is that it turns into gentrification.
Mm-hmm.
Like if they try to turn a poor community into a less poor community, I guess, they pay no regard to like culture or whatever.
I feel like gentrification, when it happens with like well-intentioned people, but they have this idea that their culture, their standard of living is better or superior.
Exactly.
And so they try and change their surroundings to meet their standard.
Yeah, and that's exactly what he talks about, is that they just kind of assume that they know what's best for these people, and that these people want to live like them too. So they're like, well, we're going to do this, 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 and this. And then they end up displacing people and like removing like culturally significant things or like traditions that people have, like make it harder for those things. Like they kind of assume that anything that's not American culture needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
Through, and that's like kind of how it turns into gentrification. It's like, we're trying to help you, but we assume that you want to be like us. So
I feel like gentrification, and I'm trying not to be extreme when I say this, it's like low-key imperialism.
No, it kind of is. Like, there's a lot
like
of it.
Small scale.
There's a lot of it in Portland.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh yeah.
I don't know. And I mean, it happens in like a lot of bigger cities too. But like,
Well, it's kind of nice though when they remake some of the like crusty industrial areas and put in like a crusty nightclub. Because at least now it's productive.
that's true. But like, yeah, he talks about how he didn't want to, like I said, they were mostly Cambodian, but it's like they've lived. It's almost like this apartment area, the Oak Park, whatever. It's almost like it's its own country. Like, it has its own culture. It's just an apartment building, but it has its own culture. And he wanted to come in and help them without removing any layer of that culture, because he knew it was still important to them. So yeah, I just liked that this guy, he wants to spread the message of Jesus, but it's like his message that he got is actually accurate and not. He never said anything about like when he moved into Oak Park that he had any intention of like turning them all into Christians. It was more like he wanted to spread Jesus's message of peace, and however that clung to people, however it stuck to them, that was fine. They didn't need to go to church every Sunday. They didn't need to claim that they were Christian or Catholic or Lutheran or whatever. It was just, as long as you got the message in some way, then he felt like he did his job. He didn't need everybody to believe everything that he believed. So, overall, I actually really liked the book. One thing to say, somewhat heavy, sorry. Like a couple weeks ago, I was in therapy.
Okay.
And I was telling my therapist, like, I feel like I'm a main character in a movie, and everybody else is like a secondary character, but I don't know what I don't know what the plot of my movie is. And that's just like so distinctly how I felt, was like that I'm right here in the middle, and that, yeah, I'm the protagonist, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And literally, in like I think the first chapter, he says something about like, he says, I grew up on Broadway musicals and Disney movies, so I expected my life to follow roughly the same plot line. And he talks about, just like how he thought that he should have been a main character in a movie too.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait a minute. How did this book find me at such a good time?
It's magic. Rabby.
Thanks,
How'd
Rabby.
you do it? Alright. Do you have a class in here?
Yeah, 1 o'clock.
1 o'clock?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. What time is it?
It's about.
We have 8 minutes. Do you want to stop and move somewhere?
We can stop and move somewhere.
Okay.
Alright. Okay. So the book that I read for this is also nonfiction, and it's called How Dark the Heavens by Sydney Owens, 1400 Days in the Grip of Nazi Terror. And since I took off the cover of my book, there's that.
Proof.
And what's cool about this is I ordered it off Amazon, used, and it's inscribed by the author. It says, to Dan Wyman, with best regards, Sydney Owens, Sarasota, June 28th, 1998.
Who's Dan Wyman?
It's a mystery. We'll never know. So basically, this book is written in a diary style, and it pretty much chronicles how he survived 1,400 days of World War II, just constantly either as a prisoner of the Nazis or as a prisoner of the Lithuanians and Latvians that cooperated with the Nazis, in ghettos and on the run, escaping from prisons and ghettos, and what they called the Akyons, which is where they would line up prisoners and select which ones to be killed and which ones to keep working. Anyway, so it starts out with his family learning about the war and the Nazis coming to invade Lithuania, which is adjacent to Germany and kind of the western part of Eastern Europe. And so he immediately thinks to himself, well, they're coming after me, so I want to go fight against them. He's a young man. He starts this book when he's like, I think he's 16 when the war starts. And he wrote down the dates, too, for a lot of this, which I thought was impressive that he even remembered. So Sunday, June 22nd, 1941, the first day.
Wow.
He remembered that
Like
specifically. It was a Sunday. I don't know. It starts with his mother's voice talking to his father, telling them that war is coming. And so basically, him and his brother separate from his parents so that they can go join, I guess, the rebellion.
I was gonna say 16 was probably like about the age that most back then. Like.
And it wasn't like it was compulsory. It was just they didn't want to just let it happen. But in the process of trying to join, like small fighting groups that were clustering, I guess, it ended up becoming kind of a caravan of citizens and soldiers all together, and that kind of made them easy pickings for Nazi groups that were trying to round people up. And so him and his brother ended up in a ghetto in a place called, and I'm gonna butcher this, Daugavpils.
Sounds right.
Yeah. And it's in Latvia. And basically it's chronicling the dehumanization and just the process of starting out with all of your most important possessions and then quickly realizing that none of these material things matter, and tossing them away until it's like the barest of the bones. And he started out with like his best bar mitzvah suit and a watch that he got from his father and these really nice shoes. And by the time he finished walking, even just in the caravan before being captured, he tossed the boots because he was getting blisters, and he's like, well, I can't stop now. I gotta keep going, so I'm gonna toss the shoes. They don't matter. My life matters more than these like Italian leather boots.
That's interesting because there's actually something pretty similar said in here.
Yeah.
It wasn't kind of, his was more of a choice rather than a, this guy's
necessity.
gonna die.
Yeah.
And he's just trying to get to, but he talks about that. And of course he compares it to Jesus. But how it's kind of like when, I don't remember anything about the Bible. Whoever walked through the desert for 40 days, was that Jesus?
That was Jesus.
I think that was.
That was
That's what he's
Jesus.
known for.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. But he was talking about how, like, he didn't have anything with him because, that's a long time.
It's 40 days.
You don't really need, like, you don't need to bring, like, your charger, you know. You only bring what you absolutely need. And for Jesus, that was nothing. Because he's Jesus, but he's like that. He was talking about how he... Exactly.
Sorry.
You can do anything with holy water. He was talking about how he felt compelled to kind of give up his material possessions as well, especially when he was living amongst people who were, like, that poor. Where it was kind of like, I don't really need... Like, he was talking about TVs. Like, I didn't need a TV. Like, I could have afforded one.
But it wasn't necessary.
But, like, yeah, like, I mean... I didn't need that to live my life. If I wanted to watch TV, I could go hang out with my neighbor who had a TV. Like, I don't need these things. And kind of took like an anti-materialistic
because
point of view.
We have all of these things around us, and he kind of references that roughly in this book. But those things aren't what matters, and they don't define us, and if someone takes them, you still are you, and you have other things besides your possessions that are important and valuable and give you life and happiness. I don't know where I was going with that.
That's okay. Sometimes we talk, and we just don't know where it's going.
Yeah.
Hope to figure it out by the end. I did that too. I just had a thought, and it's gone.
I think it's because we're running so low on sleep right now.
I got a good 6 hours.
You're at peak condition.
Oh, right. He went to he went to Hong Kong for a couple years. And he said that in Hong Kong he was just like amazed because it was just like just the advertisements, the amount that they have there. I've never been there, so I can't, say that he's right or wrong. But he was saying how like when he went in, or like when he went to Hong Kong, he just kind of left feeling terrible about himself because he's like, oh, like I guess I'm ugly then because I don't have this, and this, like, and talking about how materialism can do that, and like, I guess with his tie to Jesus, it's like, kind of like that. It's like you can take everything away, but you're still you.
Yeah.
Like,
there's this one part where they talk about this, and he's talking about one of his friends in the ghetto who had just come back from an Atkyon, which, I was telling you, they separate them into lines, and you live, you die, and those ones go to the pits, and then they get machine gunned down. That was like their go-to method.
Lovely.
Yeah, and but what they were so careless about it, and they had such a lack of respect for life, the Nazis did, that they didn't even check to see if the people were dead or not. They're in the pit, they're dead, let's start burying them. So a lot of people were even buried alive. But there was one guy, one of his friends.
That's like my worst fear.
Yeah, one of his friends, he was only wounded, and so he waited. He was surrounded by dead bodies, and he waited until night, until they were gone, and he crawled out of that pit. He crawled out of that pit back to the ghetto.
Oh my God.
And told everyone what was happening, and they were like, we're being machine gunned down, that's what's going on, we need to get out of this place. Isn't that insane, though? Can you imagine just the shock of that?
Oh, that puts everything into perspective.
I
don't like having perspective.
Some of these scenes I read and I have to stop because I can't believe that people can do this to each other. And I think it's like I'm trying to rationalize this in my mind, is how can normal people, because without the war, these would have been otherwise normal everyday citizens. They wouldn't have been called to round up their neighbors and put them in ghettos and prisons and torture them like this. They would have been everyday citizens. They would have been like you and me. Like, what was it that caused them to think that this was okay? I still don't understand.
There's a lot of I remember reading something that people thought like with at least with Hitler, because he's the poster child of this whole thing.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people think like, how could the citizens of Germany follow that and be okay with that? And like that's for a long time that's what I thought too. Like how dumb do you have to be to not think like, maybe we shouldn't kill people?
Or just how cold.
But apparently it's just the way he went about it. He didn't start off saying, I want to kill Jewish people and gay people and disabled people. That's not what he did. He started off with a very neutral, agreeable platform,
and it slowly
skewed, and like that's what kind of scares me about our current president.
Well, no, that's a valid opinion. I agree with that, because they, at one point, I remember watching the news and they were talking about having all of the Muslims sign some type of something in a database so that the government can keep track of them. And I'm like, you may as well put a gold star on their jackets.
Like, that sounds familiar. Interesting.
Like, gosh.
So yeah, like, it's stuff like that. Like I don't know historically much, but there had to, like we were talking about today, and people feel that their identity is threatened, or their culture is threatened. That's probably what started, was Hitler felt for some reason that Jewish people were
threatening
a threat to the or just Germany. And I think he was a white supremacist, but I think it was more about Germany rather than white people. I mean, white Germans, but
a nationalist point of view.
And like, so I think he saw that as a threat to his country, and in his head that was justification enough to do what he did.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's scary because that's what a lot of people say about like Muslims or even like immigrants or like refugees and stuff. They feel threatened, so they feel like, well, it's okay if we track these people because they're dangerous.
They try and justify it that way, but it's a slippery slope.
Exactly.
I don't think it would. I think we have enough checks and balances and like people on Twitter calling each other out.
Social media definitely. I mean, think about if they had that back in the day. Like, I'm sure
had
that would
so much more power than the people. Having a social media platform gives people a voice where they can actually be heard and not just through their local representatives.
The amount of stuff I've learned just from being on Twitter, like just having friends like around the globe. I'm like, oh, I had no idea that was going on.
Oh yeah.
Like, just that alone is amazing. But
this book it's exactly what it said it is. It's 1,400 days of terror.
Wow.
This.
A scholar.
I talk to the text.
I don't have
sometimes.
any.
No, I started and every page there's something different, you know? And I mean, I was talking about how I couldn't understand how people could do this to others. And to be fair, there are many passages in here where he talks about the camaraderie that some of the Jewish people had with their, what's the German word for it? Ovelmeister? Basically, like the master of the yard, like the jailer,
Like, is it in like a Stockholm syndrome kind of way?
No, it's
or it's like an actual.
These people, a lot of these officers, German officers, felt a lot of sympathy for them, and no, it's true. And sometimes I think about like the things that war makes people do, and if you have orders, like, do you carry them out? And there's like the moral question of, am I doing this for my country, or do my morals tell me that this is wrong, and does that win out over doing this for my country?
Yeah.
It's that nationalist idea that you were talking about. And a lot of these people tried to do favors for the Jews, but they just didn't have the amount of people necessary to be able to overthrow their own leadership. And so a lot of the times, if you were able to work, you were able to live. And so a lot of the officers that they befriended would treat them with favoritism, which isn't the best thing in the world, but for this situation,
so you take
go
what you
for
can
it.
get.
Take what you can get, exactly. And so he would get all of these odd jobs that he was not qualified for, but he would do them and he would learn them so that he could live. And there was this one story about how he had said that he was a professional painter because they had a carpentry unit. The Nazis had like a specific department for building all of these like fortresses and stuff that they had to do to keep the Jews in there. And so he was part of a unit that was being employed by the German troops so that they could live. And as long as you had this, what did they call it? Rufki? I really cannot speak German, and I'm not going to try. But basically, it was your golden ticket. Actually, that's a lie. It was red. It was a red pass. And it said that you were employed and useful, therefore you were not to be killed. Wow. And so he told them he was a painter, and he was not. And apparently back in the day, you had to mix lime with water and other stuff in order to paint houses. And he accidentally picked up some chlorine and did that instead. And so his hands were burning, and everyone's eyes were watering, and the German officers was like, you guys aren't real painters, are you? And him and the other guys in the room with him were like, no, we're not. But he was like, I'm not going to tell on you guys.
Oh, that's
and
nice.
He didn't,
I hate that I'm saying that about
exactly,
a Nazi.
I know.
That's nice.
But sometimes they did nice
You
things.
didn't kill him.
Which is
nice.
I know, it's all relative.
Yeah.
Everything's relative.
Never thought I'd say that about a Nazi.
Exactly.
Well, that's
As
nice.
I was reading this, I found myself saying that, like, oh, that's a good Nazi. And
that's a good Nazi.
He himself in this book, he refers to them as good Germans and bad Germans. And the bad Germans are the ones that beat the women and children and the old men and the weak and the starving just ruthlessly. He was talking about this poor woman who had tried to barter a dress to get food. And for a hot second, they were doing a lot of trading within the camp, and one of the German officers found out, and they just beat the shit out of her, and it was very awful.
That's nice.
But a lot of the Germans did try and help out, and they would stretch out the jobs as long as they could to keep them alive as long as possible. But eventually, you gotta go. And so he's tried to escape many times from different situations, and moving from one ghetto or barrack to the next, and hiding in crawl spaces and attics and roofs of the buildings themselves, not even in neighborhoods, but the buildings themselves. They would find these tiny crevices so that when they're called to line up, they would hide there.
If anything
So
to
that they
survive.
yeah, exactly. And he got separated from his brother one day when he was working, and if you had that pass and you had family, you could claim them as your family and they'd be safe too. And he didn't get there in time, and his brother was separated from him, and he died. And I cried. When I read that, I cried. He was like, I was just a few hours late, and that happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was really. It's rough. So interspersed between all of this horror, there were some bright points where he was like, humanity's not all lost.
I think that, like, that was, like, the big thing from Anne Frank's, was that she's like, deep down, I still believe that people are good. And it's like hearing that from somebody
Someone who's
yeah, meanwhile, like, if somebody, like, gets in my way on the way to class, I'm like, I hate everyone. I hate every single person. And then this girl gets killed, and she's like, people are still nice.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how? Like, it just...
I mean, especially after part in Anne Frank where she actually enters the concentration camp, and they take her clothes and they shave her head and they give her this awful tattoo, and she still has faith in humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, after you've just been dehumanized even further to, like, your basest self,
Yeah.
none of your clothes are yours anymore, your name's not yours anymore, you're just a number that they give you. They give you an identity. You're not you anymore. And she still has that, like...
I almost kind of see it as, like, a coping mechanism to where it's like, if I don't believe that, then, like, I don't... Like, I can't continue.
Well, it's interesting because throughout this book, he gives different names to his different Oberzelmeisters.
Oh.
I said it once. I'm not going to say it again because that is hard. But he would give different names when he went different places. He would say his name was Gordon or something else.
Oh, really?
Or sometimes the officers that took a liking to him would give him a name. There was one officer that he called Blondiger because he was blonde and very fair. And he called him Paulchen, which I guess is a diminutive, like, affectionate form of the name Paul, like a little brother Paul. So he called him that, even though his name's Sydney. It's not Paul. But,
Same thing.
You know, same difference.
It's close.
You can call me Paul if you give me some extra bacon. Also, bacon. This book, because you know about kosher, they don't eat pigs.
Yeah.
But when you're starving,
Right.
you go for anything. And so a lot of this is talking about kind of the struggle that he had with his faith and enduring all of this and thinking, how can he not blame God? But also finding strength through that and saying, they can't beat me down and take this away from me. Like, I still have this at least. And so they would quietly celebrate all of the holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, all of these things. And funnily enough, a lot of the times, while they would be singing or playing a violin or something like that in the camps during those holidays, the German soldiers would listen to the music because they like the Jewish songs.
Well,
Which isn't that ironic when they're trying to destroy their culture, but they are enjoying their culture.
hey, that sounds familiar. It
Yeah,
sounds like
it's
stuff
like
we do
this book.
today.
And today, it's kind of
Like,
like your book too when you were talking about the gentrification, the culture situation. It's we don't know, how do I say this? Until we're aware of things outside of our realm, we don't know enough to appreciate them until we experience it. And so trying to fix something that you don't understand, or trying to get rid of something that you don't understand, and trying to exterminate that.
It's seen from a very selfish lens. Like,
It is.
they think they're being selfless because they're trying to help, but what they're doing is assuming what's best for them and assuming that their way of life is superior, and just thinking like, well, you're poor, maybe you wouldn't be poor if you were more American, so we're gonna fix everything and make it American.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, maybe you made my house nicer, but now I can't do this thing that was really important to my culture, or like now I don't, you displaced like
My family.
yeah, like
Yeah.
it's not, they don't actually pay attention to the needs of the people that they're helping.
Yeah, for sure. If there's one thing I learned from this book, it's that humans are selfish, but also humans are great. We're a very complicated species. Humans are complicated, and it's hard to understand one another, but we try. Even this book, he's always trying to understand, like, what is going on and what is my place in this. And he's always fighting. He's always trying to either escape or to move up or to help people or just do something. He doesn't give up, and I really admire that about him.
I think both of our dudes are fighters.
Yes. Yep.
And he's like, my guy, Dr. Chung, he's more of a passive fighter, I guess, like a peaceful fighter, kind of like a work from the inside type of thing, like using what he has to help the people below him, but like not, he's kind of like exploiting himself, exploiting his own resources to help people that don't have those things.
I have a connection to that. This guy kind of does a similar thing whenever he had like extra potatoes he would find during work, or he would have interactions with surrounding farms or the camps if he ever had a job that he could go out. All the Jewish people that were able to work would always try and go out and find rations for other people that were in the ghetto that weren't chosen, and they would find clothing, shoes were really important, foot wraps, any type of food, any type of drink, cigarettes. Cigarettes were a big commodity. The people around him, the civilians around the camps and that were interacting with them when they were living in the ghettos, not the concentration camps, but when they were living in the ghettos, a lot of them tried to take advantage of the Jews, and they would say, oh, if you give me this, I'll try and get you guns or food or something. And they wouldn't.
Yeah.
They wouldn't. So you would give them all your money and your jewels and your nicest whatever, and get nothing back in return. They were just stealing from people, So he kind of learned to expect to be cheated and swindled, but at the same time, when he needs these ammunition and food, he has to try. And so a lot of them, they just did what they could, and if it didn't work out, it didn't work out. Another part of this novel that really surprised me, and it shouldn't have, but I always think of sexual harassment and stuff in terms of the feminine perspective, but it happens to guys too. And he's telling this one passage tells of an experience, and this happens a few times, where he's either sexually harassed or groped or violated by German soldiers. There is one where he was in the showers with a bunch of the other Jewish guys, finally getting an actual shower, and one of the German officers that patrolled their unit came in and was just looking at them and like feeling their arms and muscles and stuff.
Ew.
And saying what fine young men they are, and he was like very disturbed by it. And then he told,
you've done enough.
yeah,
Oh,
I know, and I was just like appalled, but I shouldn't be, because this happens to women all the time, and I think in my own mind I have this I don't know, wall that I have to remind myself it happens to guys too. And maybe it's even, I'm not saying it's worse for any gender, but I think we don't talk about sexual harassment in men ever. It's like the Terry Crews
Yeah.
sexual harassment.
It's because it's
You read that on Twitter, right?
Yeah.
Yes, you were in that class.
Men being sexually harassed is seen mostly by other men as
Weak.
yeah, it's like they're not masculine.
Yeah.
Whereas like it's something that happened to them.
Exactly.
So, or like there's the cases of like the female teachers having sex with
Underage males.
yeah, and people are saying like you should be grateful. Like no, that's still rape.
No, that's still rape.
Like
It's still a person, an authority figure for one,
yeah.
taking advantage of a younger person that is in a position submissive to you.
So I think like guys, there's that added stigma of like saying that it happened to them. Like guys probably in a different way feel like a different pressure to not say anything because they'll be seen as not masculine or weak or that they should be grateful or, you know, just all sorts of stuff. Or like if they were abused by a male, like you'd be like, there's a whole realm of gay jokes there. You know, people are terrible. Like, so definitely agree with you there.
Yeah. And it's just on top of all of this other stuff happening to him, being starved and beaten and always questioning your safety. It's like on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, being secure and knowing that you're safe is like one of your most basic needs, and without that you can't build upward. And he was always afraid of being killed or shot or beaten for no reason, and on top of that now he has to worry about being sexually harassed and violated. And I mean there's quite a few, I'm not going to go into them, but there's quite a few.
We should probably, we're at 35.
Are we?
And I talked for 16 on mine. Gonna have to do a lot
How
of
do we
cutting.
start? I don't want. Well, he had like a cute little romance with one of the girls, and she died, and it was very touching. But you know what? That's not necessary. To I'm just a romantic.